Welcome back to the Grand Solar Minimum channel. Today is Wednesday, February 24th, 2021. Thanks for tuning in for your latest Grand Solar Minimum news. Tonight, we'll start with some space weather. Our solar wind speeds coming in at 479.8 kilometers per second with a density of 7.5. Well, we got two sunspots to talk about. As you can see on your screen, it almost looks like a face. There's two eyes to the north, and then of course the bottom one could be the mouth. But nonetheless, only two of those areas are numbered. The one to the far right is AR 2804, and then the one in the southern region directly below that is 2805. The one behind it, moving now Earth forward, is not labeled yet. It could, but right now they're not calling this a sunspot, and sunspot number on this one is 31. So this is not bad for two sunspot regions, but I'm going to show you here something real quick. Kind of impressive motions here just watching this, thanks to the folks over at SPACEWEATHER.com. I'm going to go ahead and zoom this in for you real fast and let you guys take a quick peek. Check out, that is AR 2804, the northern one. Check this out. Watch these almost merge. This, to me, folks, almost could be two different sunspot groupings at this point. So this one up here, definitely in the northern region, is the most impressive of the two groupings right now. 2805 is a very small sunspot number. I believe we're talking somewhere around 11, which would make 2804 sunspot number 20 for that matter. So nothing super crazy here, but just interesting. We have been talking about how quiet it's been with the northern region of the sun, and that is also indicating that we are seeing a delay towards solar cycle 25 getting underway finally. But we are starting to see a little bit more sunspot activity, but I'll show you guys here in a minute. We'll go over to the grandsolarminimum.com in our space weather section. I'll show you guys something real quick too. Let's see. Let's finish up here. KP indices are at a 4 right now. 24-hour max is at a 4. And while we're talking about KP indices, that at a 4 is just below a G1. And to talk about the CME that sideswiped us, well, that happened earlier today. And it was a weak impact, obviously. We had nothing as far as earthquakes, strong earthquakes, or volcanic activity. This definitely did not deliver anything they thought. Now, as far as the G1 storm, we almost got that. As I said, the KP indices are sitting at a 4. Remember, we need a 5 to get to G1 levels. And folks, you know, G1 level storm is very minor, nothing really to be too concerned about as well. So not a big deal from this filament eruption that we saw yesterday. And I know a lot of people tried to make it sound real big and scary, but you know, I have certain sources I believe that would contact me, I think, on something like that. I told somebody, you know, I'm friends with Lee Wheelbarger, as he showed me a lot about Grand Solar Minimum. And usually when there's something of a big deal, I usually hear from him first of all. So that was my first indication not to worry. But also the second one was that it was so far below our magnetic field that sideswipe is, to say the least. That was probably the worst it was going to do. Barely touching the magnetic field at all is what actually happened from this CME. Not much of an impact. So that's good, you know. It's also lets us know where we are in the cycle, which is still minimum conditions. I mean, CME is flinging this way. Our magnetic field is weak. So thank God that this CME was weak. I mean, this would have been a vulnerable time had that been a little bit stronger. So, all right, let's go over to the grandsolarminimum.com. Oh, one more thing. Cosmic radiation dosage rates have changed. Dropped below 7% for the first time in several years, actually. Now, 6.9% is still high. The record is 11.7%. And the record low amount of cosmic radiation penetration in the atmosphere is a negative 39%. So when you look at it on that scale, we're way, way, way above the record low and not that far away from the record high. Also, another indication to show you where we are in this cycle, not quite yet out of the minimum, still showing minimum condition. All right, now let's go over to the grandsolarminimum.com, check out our space weather stats. As I told you earlier, KP indices have hovered around 4 for the past 24 hours consistently. At the end of the day here, might have been a chance to see that G1 storm, but KP indices still maintaining at a 4. And we will let you know if that does creep up any higher before the end of the broadcast. Take a look at the sun right now. Those sunspots are really minor. I mean, this is, we had a comment the other night, and from the last video we did, reporting on the sunspots on Monday. And, the person commented and said these really aren't sunspots if you, take a look at the size of this and detectability. If we didn't have the equipment that we had, we wouldn't even see these. And he's absolutely right. Think about how many sunspots during a Maunder minimum were not counted that are being counted this time around. So it's really hard to say what kind of a strength of a grand solar minimum we're getting ready to head into, because in one hand you could say, well, we've got more sunspots than we did back then, and then you also have to factor in that we didn't have that kind of equipment to monitor the sun back in the Maunder minimum or even the Dalton minimum. So it'll be interesting. We're all going to learn together, right? What it seems like. Take a look at the big picture. Stereo B does not report, so that's why you have the black space. Look at that. Yeah, after these sunspots here, 2805 and 2804, if we're going to see a sunspot, it's going to spontaneously develop right in front of our eyes. Because if you look at this disk right here, after those sunspot regions, that's it. 2 pretty decent sized coronal holes, one that's near the eastern limb right now. I like my chances of seeing some geomagnetic activity from that one. So we could be on alert somewhere around March 4th or 5th, possibly seeing the effects of that coronal hole. Could be, from right now, just judging the size of it right now, could be as impactful as a G1 storm. But again, we're not seeing a very high frequency of geomagnetic storms, and we've had a few chances to have them, and it's just not quite there yet. So all these indications are still pointing that our sun is still in a state of solar minimum, and it will be for a couple more years before we really start to notice an uptick in solar activity. We may get waves of solar activity like we did back in September, going into October, and then again, I think it was in December. Wait, it was August and September, and it quieted down to October, and then November kind of had an active end of the month, and then the beginning of December. But right around Christmas is when things got really quiet again, and we've been relatively quiet until the last couple of weeks, where we've seen a couple of sunspots. But we're going to see that a few more times, and the frequency should be each time we see this, we should see a few more sunspots from these waves of activity until we get the sun back up to its max. Well, right now, that's not happening. These sunspots that are developing on our star right now are very weak. They're very small. In fact, 2804 is definitely worth talking about now, but the other one, 2805 in the southern region, very weak. Probably shouldn't even count. Wouldn't have counted it in the Maunder minimum, I can tell you that, because they couldn't see it. They couldn't detect it. And I've said this many, many times. We are blessed to be alive at a time like this. Yeah, I mean, there's not really much to report after these two regions right here fizzle out. This could develop, I guess, but really here's the Earth-facing center of the star, and then this is what's to come still. So everything back here, you go from the 0, which is where we are on the scale of things, in front of the star, and back is towards the eastern limb. We've got some coronal holes, active region there, maybe not. Maybe something really far behind on the eastern limb, maybe. So, I kind of expected to see a little more activity over the next several weeks with sunspots, like one here, one there, but enough to keep the streak of spotless days down low, because technically we are supposed to be winding up this minimum. And it is not unusual to see quite a bit of sunspots the year after you come out of the bottom of a solar minimum. All right, so what is some of the things to expect during a grand solar minimum? We get these questions all the time. Tonight's broadcast is going to be a little different. I don't have a lot of articles I want to go over, but I do want to talk about what happened last week in Texas one more time. The factors that we had here were winterization was the biggest. The other debate was solar wind. Some say 10%, others say 25% is how much power we get from solar wind in Texas on the grid. So I wanted to clear that up as well. But also, when you see these 80-degree plus temperature swings in just 1 week, this is part of what happens during grand solar minimums. And just to show you here, look at this. Here's our temperatures in Topeka, Kansas. All right. From the 16th of February till yesterday, 93-degree temperature swing in just a week. 93 degrees, folks. That's Fahrenheit. All right. 87-degree temperature difference. I mean, guys, look at this. We're talking about minus 21 on the 16th. And then on the 23rd, it's 71 degrees outside. Now, thankfully, Topeka, Kansas, Wichita, Dallas, Texas, Oklahoma City, your rivers haven't been frozen all winter. So you're less likely to see the ice jamming in those states. Now, Missouri, that's whole different. Arkansas, different. Louisiana, maybe. But Arkansas and Missouri are already experiencing some minor ice jamming right now as we speak. I've lived through one of those in Buffalo, and it got really cold for about 4 weeks. This was in 2018. And then it warmed up to 60 degrees. Really warm. I mean, it's been in the single digits all week. And then one day it got to 63 degrees outside. Boom! You talk about floods everywhere, ice jamming, flooded out basements. I mean, it was insane. People were knocking on door to door, gas company, to make sure that residents were not flooded too bad to where they had to turn off the gas because the pilot might be out because of how much water is in your basement. It was that serious. So when you see a temperature swing of 70 degrees within 36 hours like we did in Buffalo, that's part of that grand solar minimum mentality. These temperature swings right here also, these are not just some freak incidents. This is all part of what has happened during this period of lower solar activity. Been documented. Look it up in the past. Alaska is usually warmer during grand solar minimum periods. And we are experiencing warmer. In fact, it was colder in Houston, Texas. It was 16 degrees, I think, February 16th. And it was 25 degrees in some, middle central Alaskan city. So that right there should tell you. And that, if you go back and look modern minimum up, you'll see where the warmer climates were, where the droughts were, and where the cold temperatures and cold winter weathers were affecting what parts of the globe. Right now, in a way, I think we're seeing a lot of it early, in my opinion. I know we're just at the very beginning, so I was just expecting a little bit, like a taste here and there. But I felt like February had to have been one of the most brutal winter months for most of us here in North America, except if you lived in the Southeast. But you guys got a dose of that for a week or so. I can safely say where I live, I haven't seen more than 6 days above freezing. Here recently, we started to see some temperatures going up. But other than that, we had 2 days on Christmas that were in the mid-50s. a day here in the upper 30s, a day there in the upper 30s, and it's been at freezing or below for a good portion of the winter. So I'm ready for a thaw. I'm ready for a little bit of melting myself, but this is extreme, guys. 93 degrees in 7 days. We will see this more and more as we continue to climb towards the grand solar minimum. Right now, we're at the very beginning. Even during solar max, we will still see situations like this throughout the max, because our solar max is predicted to be pretty weak at this point. We're not expected to see, and from what I've seen so far to start this, unless some spontaneous activity just jumps out of nowhere and explodes, and I mean massive activity from the sun, solar cycle 25, in my opinion, is already showing us that it is going to be weaker. Not by a lot, but it's going to be weaker than solar cycle 24 for sure. That number of 115, smooth sunspot number, realistically should be probably somewhere around 97. And that's the difference in how much weaker we're talking. I'm not talking drastic. So solar cycle 26, 27, perhaps we'll be talking about something much greater than what we're talking about right now. All right, so coming up, not tonight, but I wanted to kind of preview this over here at thegrandsolarminimum.com. If you go to our resources part here on the website, not the volcanoes and earthquakes, but GSM resources, click on weekly crop, and it will bring you to this PDF, about 26 pages to 30 some pages. And this will give us an idea of what the farmers are dealing with, what they're battling, the temperatures, the soil temperatures. Obviously, this is a report dated up to the 23rd, which was yesterday. We had a lot of cold weather, folks. And their citrus crops in Texas definitely were damaged. We also are monitoring the drought situation in the Southwest. Again, the Northwest, Alaska, warm. The the southwestern part of the United States, the western part, drought. This is normal grand solar minimum patterns. And that's all we have to base off of as far as making reports about what to expect during grand solar minimum. We are going back and looking at the historical data. And so far, it's lining up. It's lining up. The other day I was asked the question, if sunspots or lack of cause cooling, and 2020 was one of the most spotless years in a long time, and I think he meant 2019. Either way, last 2 years we've seen a lot of spotless days. Why weren't the temperatures reflecting that? And the reason for that is that we are now starting to see the effects of last year's and the years before lack of sunspots. There is a bit of delay when it comes to the sunspot cycles and how it translates to the climate. But my point is that in solar cycles 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, and 19 were all not sufficient enough or weak enough to affect the climate in a cooling manner. Now, so far in 24, the late part of 24, and early 25, we are now starting to see the effects. Think about it. In 2009, in 2008 and 2009, it was one of the deepest minimums we'd seen in over 150 years. What happened 4 years later in 2014 when we had a double peak? Okay, a double peak in sunspot. But 2014, if you guys remember, we had that very weak jet stream that dropped negative 20 degrees for daytime highs as far as southwest Ohio. Okay, that was delayed from what happened at the end of our minimum, the bottom of the minimum. The delayed effect, we saw very cold winter weather in 2012 as well. So I think now we're starting to see the effects from 19, which was one of the coldest or one of the least spotless years. And I think February is a great representation of what happens with lower solar activity. Now, as the sun strengthens back into a maximum, this will ease up a little bit. These cold wave patterns and these big, snowstorms to 2025. But don't get your hopes up that it's going to feel like a normal season again by 2025, because it's not. It's still going to be below normal. Even though we're heading towards a peak, we're still going to see cooler temperatures. We're still going to see cold winters. It's just not going to be as drastic as what we're seeing right now and last year. Really, ever since 2017 to the present. So as the solar cycles get weaker, the effect on the climate becomes more apparent as well, as far as weaker magnetic field, allowing more cosmic radiation, creating more cloud nucleation, creating these massive extreme snowfall events, these cyclone bombs, these big nor'easters. All of this has contributed to how much highly charged particles we have in our atmosphere. In each solar cycle, we get more highly charged particles. We get weaker solar winds, which makes a weaker jet stream and allows colder Arctic air to filter in to the mid-latitudes and further south. So it takes time. This grand solar minimum stuff, I've never promised you guys that we would be dealing with many ice age conditions next week or next month or next year. Cooling is decadal, and that's how science works. It's not a off and on switch like that. Now, if there are a couple other factors when it comes to oceanic cycle oscillations and stuff of that nature, there could be a perfect storm that could throw us into an abrupt cold period. I'm not saying that's not possible, but from what I'm experiencing and what we're seeing right now, everything's happening according to the way these grand solar minimum cycles happen. And the years that we keep passing here, especially getting closer to 2030, these kinds of events, the freeze, the deep freeze, the 80 to 90 degree temperature swing, the droughts in the southwest, and Alaska with the warmer temperatures and the more snow in the north, these things will continue. That's why it's important that we follow these crop reports. And they report these every Wednesday, and then usually are reporting on from the past 7 days. So it's up to date till the 23rd. And then next Wednesday, we'll get information from today until next Tuesday. But you'll see more of these reports being done on a daily basis when we start getting into our planting season, which, guys, it's February. It's right around the corner. And we'll talk about what we can expect as far as spring-like weather here soon. But first, I promised you guys last show we did that I want to start doing more prep talk. And I think a lot of the things that we saw in Texas were because people weren't aware or knew how or just properly were not informed on how, certain things work. So tonight, I saw this and I thought this would be interesting because I don't know about you guys, but the big question I always face in the Grand Solar Minimum community, where do I go? Where do I move? And this article right here takes a look. Now, it's not so much of the warm climate thing that I was looking for, but they thought these 6 features were important when it comes to off-grid property. So I want to go over this tonight. Number 1 they list is space and usage. How much land do you need to live off the grid? All right. And what's great about this article is that they just don't give you one option. There's several options on how much land. And I'll just read a little bit from here. You can live off grid on the right piece of land, whether it encompasses just 1 acre or 100 acres. All pieces of land were neither created equal nor with your specific wants and needs in mind. The natural assets and physical attributes of the land will play a substantial role in how it can be successfully used. So it goes on to talk. Hey, look, if you want 5 acres of land, grow a garden large enough to feed your family of 6. If vertical gardening and edible landscaping are worked into the food growing design. Guys, there are, and Jesse and I have talked about this too, Jesse Vorwall from Wisconsin. There's actually weeds that you can plant that you could also eat in your garden. So there's so many things that you can do to produce your own food. But this gives you a basic idea. If you only want to deal with 5 acres, small and medium livestock could be kept on such a small off-grid homestead, like rabbits, chickens, and ducks. Even a few heads of dwarf goats maybe possibly could exist on a 5-acre homestead. Wood wood stove, fireplace, or wood cook stove will be used. There will not likely be enough offered by the land, even if it's wooded, for this type of heat source to be sustainable. Additional firewood will have to be purchased. So on 5 acres of land, they're even saying you're not going to be able to cut down your own firewood. You're going to have to go get that yourself, pay for it possibly. 10 acres. It gives you more suggestions on how to take care of a 10-acre ranch style property here off grid. Traditional garden can be used to feed a family of 6 on this much land, if not more than 30% wooded. Important to know. To grow more food, put up or sell using vertical gardening, container gardening, edible landscaping is still highly recommended. Now, 10 acres. Now we can talk about a dairy cow, a few head of miniature cattle, 2 horses can be kept on this homestead with 10 acres. Guys, it goes on. 15 to 20 acres. More advice. And I'm not saying that this is the holy grail in the answer to your questions. But as I was looking at this, I thought this would be a great starting point when it comes to things you want to think about when you want to buy property and live off the grid. Unfortunately, there are a lot of states that are not on board with living off the grid. I remember a story from a guy in South Carolina. He owned a mobile home, but he had his solar panels and windmills hooked up to his trailer, so he had electric that way. He had wood stoves in his trailer, so he didn't need a furnace. He had 2 wood stoves in there. And as far as water, he was fetching it from rivers, or he had a well. Now, the only thing that I can understand about being connected to utilities is if you didn't have a septic tank. Because if you didn't have a septic tank, where's your drainage going? Where's all that waste going? You can't just dump it on your land. You can't dump it in the river. So I get that. But if you have your own septic tank, and this gentleman did, you don't have to be hooked up to utilities at that point. You just have to make sure the septic tank is kept up and maintenance properly. Otherwise, you could be facing some very expensive repair bills if you let that go. But again, this guy had it all figured out. His water, his power, his heat, everything. He had it all figured out. And it was in South Carolina. They condemned his property and the house he was living in. Nothing wrong with it. Clean as a whistle. Food in the cupboards and refrigerator. Working appliances. Everything he was doing was working. And, to say it was free, I don't know if that's a proper way of saying it. We don't really understand the kind of work that goes into running a ranch. I mean, these farmers out here, being friends with Matt's really opened my eyes to the kind of work that these guys have to do. So I wouldn't call it free if he's designed solar panels and windmills and hooked up to his miniature power grid at his home. I wouldn't call it free if he dug a well and has a pump that he uses that's a hand pump. That's still work to get it. And I wouldn't call it free when you're talking about heating a house with a wood stove, when more than likely to get cheaper wood, you're willing to split it yourself and stack it instead of paying for it to be delivered and stacked nice and neat. So I wouldn't call it free when we're talking about food, because you have to work your butt off and make sure that you're tilling your gardens, you're keeping up with everything, growing, harvest, getting ready for the next plant. It's a continuous cycle. So living off grid is not just something that sounds cool. It's a way of life, and you have to commit to it or it's not going to work. And I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know how much of that I could commit to right now, but I better start learning how, because we might have to make those choices someday, all of us. We may have to. Look what happened in Texas. And the majority of their grid is powered off of coal and natural gas, and they still have problems. What if we have a major problem here in New York? The grid's down for 3, 4, 5 weeks. I'm not saying we got to start growing a garden, but man, if we already had indoor growing going on, we sure are in a lot better position than some other folks when it comes to produce. Or maybe growing plants that produce nutrients high in protein, such as moringa trees. produces high levels of protein. I know you're thinking, what can you do? There's all kinds of recipes for those kinds of the tree bark to get the nutrients that you need. Look, I want to find a good resource for us to go and look at, like a homesteading section. Mari and I have been talking about it. Mari is the genius behind the website stuff, and we do want to add a prepper section. So there will be some time for us here in the future where we can sit down and go through these kinds of options. What's going to work for you best? And like I said, I just think this article is a good starting point. You know, we're getting different sizes of lands that you would want to buy, and here's how you would handle it. These are just suggestions. This is not holy grail stuff or by the Bible. 2, location. One constant rule of real estate is always and will always be location, location, location. The same old adage holds true when seeking an off-grid property. Not only should the amount and type of land heavily be weighed on when planning to buy it, but the location will become a massive determining factor in its success. Now, obviously, for you folks out there who follow this channel, you're going to want to move somewhere warm, right? And some of you are wondering about, is Texas going to be far enough south? Now, when I first started learning about this, the first person that told me that you probably want to live as close to the equator as possible during the Grand Solar Minimum was Lee Wheelbarger. And I remember when he told me that, I'm like, okay, sure, guy, I'll go ahead and move to Guatemala right now. But after what happened in Texas for a week straight, knowing that there's more of that to come in the future, maybe not next year or the year after, but we start seeing flashes of this every other year. And then as we get closer to the 2030s, it's a more frequent thing. It's to be expected, and possibly not just 8 days long, but 14 to 21 days long. And 3 weeks of that far south, that changes everything. That changes everything because we're already growing down south at this time. Citrus crops are ruined because of this cold snap. So, location. Not everybody has the money to move to Guatemala or Jamaica or near the equator. I think if people could get to Tennessee and south, I think you can manage in a Grand Solar Minimum. If you're really thick-skinned, stay in the Northeast if you want. See how crazy it gets up here. I don't know. I think Mari and I have a plan that we'll reevaluate in some years, and try to figure out if being up north is right for us. For now, I think we can manage. We're doing things right now to that house to make it to where we can stand the cold. The insulation is important to us. Sealing off all crevices. I mean, everything that we're doing right now, we're weatherizing this house. This house is going to be ready to go when we move in. So if you're planning to stay, maybe some remodeling. If you live in the Northeast, Great Lakes, Northern Plains, maybe it's time, if you don't want to go south, maybe it's time to think about remodeling your house and really insulating everything. Get that spray foam going. Start thinking about alternative heat sources. Start thinking about alternative generators. All kinds of things. If you're just doing off-grid living, I think solar and wind is valuable if you're just doing it for yourself. If you have to share it with other folks on the grid, I just think that's where we run into the problems. Terrain, also another feature that you need to look forward to when you're living off-grid location. Water. Buying water is not a viable option for daily off-grid living. Property that is not going to be attached to a municipal water system must, at the bare minimum, have a well. It can then be connected to a solar-powered or manual pump, which are some of the things that we just talked about. You're going to live off-grid, and you're really going to do it. They're giving you the suggestions here. Relying on gas, diesel, or kerosene to power generate a pump, the well water into the home will add a lot of extra expense to the homestead and is not really a sustainable option during a long-term disaster. The reason why I really like this article is because this is how to rely on the natural resources at hand. So don't plan on running a generator to run these well pumps. Design a solar panel or windmill type system that will power your pump for the well. Period. Instead of trying to do things and cut corners and cheat, like, have generators and other things that would be convenient, why not prepare how to do it the hard way, the manual way? You'll be ready for anything, I tell you that. Number 5, pastures, hay fields. Not just any large open space of fairly level land is a pasture or hayfield. Such space can almost be turned into one unless the area floods. Another terrain-related issue to research before buying land. But doing so will require both time and money. The growing Amish community in the region does all their pasture and field cultivation the old-fashioned way, by either pushing the manual equipment themselves or using horses to pull seeders, conditioners, and balers. Again, this article is telling you, look, the only way we can teach you how to do this is to roll up your sleeves and get it done. Put some elbow grease in it, get some back going. And again, talking to my friend Matt makes me realize how much work goes into just being a farmer. And do people realize the amount of work that if you were living off of grid? I mean, I guess the good news is you'll have all the time in the world to do your chores. Let's face it, if you're living off grid somewhere, you're not the type of person that has to have cable TV or movies to watch on a Friday night. So you're not going to mind all this work, I guess. How long can you keep it up for? So it's really important to do your research when you're thinking about your prep, when you're thinking about trying to live off grid. I really want people to make sure they go step by step and realize what they're getting themselves into. And I'm not saying that to like scare anybody from not doing it, but I think there's a lot of people out there, and I'm not saying anybody here in this chat, because I think the people that follow this channel, you guys are brilliant. A lot of you bring some great ideas to the table already. So I think a lot of you understand how it's supposed to be done. But there are people out there who simply just want you to do all the work for them, the research included. It's a common entitlement that we face now because the generations that are coming up from the technology, unfortunately, I think the technology is making certain people soft. And that's not a negative thing. I'm not trying to be negative, but it's the truth. The folks that grew up in the 50s and 60s definitely worked a lot harder as younger people. As an adult, you did what it took. You lived, more than likely, if you were working in the 50s and 60s, you grew up in the Depression, and you saw your family do some crazy things to get food on the table and bills paid, if at all. And I think the further away we are from incidents like the Great Depression, it makes people soft. And right now, and I'll tell you how I know this, how I feel about this, is by looking at what's happening right now with the pandemic. Too many people out there can't handle the isolation, the long-term sacrifices to make sure that we have a healthy future. So, unfortunately, there's work that has to be put in that's not pleasurable, that's not fun, that's not desired in any way. But you have to look at it just like living off grid. It's a necessity. It's not the most fun work in the world, but you got to do it. You got to do it. If you want to live, you want to survive, you got to do it. And living off a grid, like I said, that takes a serious commitment. Otherwise, you will see some failure. All right, soil. Again, very important, especially if you're going to grow crops. Guys, check this article. I left the link in the last video. It's the same website. If you just go to the home section of the web page, from the link in the last video we did, and it goes over all these great topics. And I'm going to pick one from here and there and kind of go over certain tips and stuff. But tonight, I always get a lot of questions about off-grid living, and I thought it would be a great way to kind of go over some suggestions, a starting point of what to do if you wanted to start your putting your plans in motion for living off-grid. I thought this would be a great way to kind of kick that off. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at some weather, shall we? And I'll tell you something right now. Before I start this update, the Euro model is a little bit more aggressive when it comes to winter weather. The GFS is not being as kind. And I really, especially for the majority of the country, I'm curious on how we are going to produce a major winter weather storm that will affect the percentage of the country like we've seen in February. Right now, the GFS, I am not seeing that yet. And this, we still have a chance for some colder weather, March 4th, 5th, and 6th in the Northeast, parts of the Ohio valleys. But I think spring is trying to make its appearance now to some degree. Lots of rain for the South, folks. If you live in Tennessee, Kentucky, especially eastern Tennessee, there is two different systems. We've got one that's going to move, and the Euro is showing more rain. So the first system here in the South is going to generally produce about 1 to 2 inches of rain. That's going to be across parts of Mississippi, northern Alabama, and northern Georgia, into southeast Tennessee. That's system number one. System number two is right here. Not as strong, and it moves a little bit further north. So now we're out of the deep south, middle Tennessee, like Murfreesboro, Tullahoma, Nashville, will be affected all up and down I-75. And again, we're generally talking about 1 to 2 inches of rain in these areas. Notice our storm off to the east over the weekend, all rain. It's been a while since we've seen a system like this affect the Northeast as just rain. At least 2 months. Usually these are bringing us big time snows. We got 6 inches of snow on Monday, and I'll show you those totals as well. Snow across the Northwest Mountains to be expected. But let's continue on. This is February 27th on Saturday. Moving into Sunday, that storm moves offshore. And look at this. More rain for the South, except now the track moves a little bit further north. Started down here. Wave number 1, wave number 2 goes across middle Tennessee. Now, wave number 3 is going to affect the majority of Kentucky, at least the southern half. And this is heavy rain. Again, 1 to 3 inches expected. And this is by Sunday. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 4 days, we could see anywhere from 1 to 3 inches in a widespread area of rain, and up to 6 to 8 inches of rain in other areas as well, in just 4 days. A lot of you know it's still February, so rainfall totals for February are not quite as high yet. And we talked about this Monday about spring severe weather and tornadoes, and how the National Weather Service thinks we might have a slow start to severe weather and tornado outbreaks. So that doesn't mean we won't see dramatic amounts of rain. And again, you can blame cosmic rays and highly charged particles, cloud nucleation, all that good stuff on these heavy rain events. So this is Sunday. The system moves out, and look, Monday, day number 5. More rain, again, for central Tennessee, northern Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. A wider swath of 1 to 2, maybe 3 inches in some areas. So day number 5 of rain affecting the same area over and over. But before this weak cold front pushes through, pushes the high pressure and drives that moisture out to sea, and we will see colder temperatures for the Northeast, the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes regions of Minnesota, Wisconsin as well. We'll see that cold weather. Meanwhile, the snow is still staying above the border here, and we are not seeing anything major or even significant to affect the lower 48 as far as snow totals, except if you live on the Northwest. There's a plethora of moisture. It's on its way. No end in sight for that. They are definitely getting plenty of moisture. But look at this. High pressure dominates the Northeast. There's a low pressure system off the East Coast that fizzles out. Finally, we get some kind of a storm system here on March 9th. That's for the Central Plains states, South Dakota. Heaviest snow. That's just kind of hovering around in the Great Lakes states and the northern part of the plains. At this point, by March 11th, It's all rain when it gets to Ohio. It's going to be frozen precip for the folks in the mountainous areas of Virginia, West Virginia, and also sleet and snow mixing in parts of Michigan. By the 12th of March, this system rolls off to the East Coast. Now, my theory or my guess is that if it ran up the East Coast like a nor'easter, that the air would be cold enough to possibly talk about one more snow. But right now, GFS is staying quiet when it comes to any kind of major winter. So we might get a couple of weeks. And you know what? Texas needs a couple of weeks. The Northeast needs a couple of weeks. The central part of the United States needs a couple of weeks. I mean, there's so many weather situations that's happened. Everybody could definitely use a pause in this major snow, but now we got to deal with flooding issues in Tennessee, Kentucky, and northern parts of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia over the next several days. So now we turn the switch off from snow to rain, and lots of it. Here's our temperatures over the next several days, guys. Trying to warm up. That colder air does push through towards the end of the month in the Northeast and in the northern plains, but really, the warmer air in the south is dominating. This Arctic air does make a push into the Northeast by the 2nd of March. But there's nothing, it's all dry air. There's no snow, no moisture. So it's just going to be cold winter's days from the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of March. And then after that, March 5th is probably the last time we see brutal Arctic temperatures overnight, as the Northeast part of the country stays chilly, but not as bad as it could be this time of year. I'll take 43 degrees on March 8th any day for a daytime high. Ohio Valley, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, seeing mild temperatures 50 and 60. March 9th and the 10th, more cold air tries to filter in the Northeast. Again, this looks also short term to me. By the time we get to the middle of March, look at that. Those are your daytime highs on March 12th. So we went from 70% of the country with snow on the ground and freezing temperatures to 80 to 85% of the country with temperatures at above freezing within 2 weeks. Unreal how we are shifting so quickly on some of these temperature swings from the large amounts of snow to now we're dealing with large amounts of rain. And these are the kind of things that we can expect to see throughout a grand solar minimum. As we get further into this and deeper into this, we will see these situations and storms intensify and become more frequent as time moves along. I want to say hello to a few folks out there in the chat tonight. Jesse Vorwood, hello. Good to see you out there. I mentioned you earlier. I don't know if you were here or not. Dorothy Rose, always a pleasure to see you as well. Ian, good to see you, my friend. Long time no see. Of course, my lovely wife, who is always a pleasure to see in the chat as well in real life, too. Didn't know that. Love you, babe. You know. Feeling mushy still from the anniversary. Knife Collector, good to see you. Shirley Davis, hello. Lots of new faces in here as well. Loving the interaction that I'm seeing in the chat from everybody participating in the conversation. You know, a lot of the things that I like about this group, even if it's not talking about what I'm speaking of, there's always lots of ideas and lots of good tips going on in the chat on how to do growing, how to do homesteading, and all of this off-grid living stuff. You folks are pretty on top of it anyway. So if you're new to this group, pay attention. We got pretty smart people here that will help you along the way. Look, we're not egotistical here. We're not trying to be right or predict the biggest thing in the world. For the most part, from what I've seen from this community here at the Grand Solar Minimum channel, everybody's been very helpful to each other. Every time I see a question in the comment section of after our videos, there's a lot of folks that participate and volunteer answers, and they're correct answers. They're not just answers that are fitting a narrative. They're correct answers. So I'm impressed with the intelligence level for most of you folks that follow this channel, and your support is continued to be appreciated. Folks, if you do like what we do, kind of like a tip jar thing over on Patreon, we do have a channel, Grand Solar Minimum. All we're asking is for $1 memberships every month. You know, that way we can continue to expand our channel, provide more content. That way, if maybe YouTube has a problem with what we're saying from time to time, it won't affect us too much because we have the funds to continue to broadcast the truth about our climate and natural solar cycles. So please check us out on Patreon and become a member there. We will get things going again as far as call-in shows. So members will be a part of those call-in shows as well. We'll have a live phone number. People get to call in. If you're around for the last 3 years, you guys got to experience what that was like. Some events have taken place that have kind of taken us away from that, but we are slowly getting back to that here soon. Also, please leave a comment and let us know what you're most looking forward to here in the next few days when you get the warmer weather that is on its way. It might be washing your car. It might be mowing the lawn. Who knows? Some of you might be able to do that kind of yard work over the weekend. So please leave me a comment. Let me know where you're from and what kind of weather or events you're waiting for to happen as we get closer to spring and out of this, hopefully, winter. Right now, it looks pretty good as far as maybe just having a cold, mild winter heading out into spring. So let's keep our fingers crossed that we see these patterns. And I tell you, I've seen enough snow and cold. I'm ready for a thaw. I don't know about you guys. All right, that's going to do it for me tonight. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Grand Solar Minimum channel for your Grand Solar Minimum news update. Until our next broadcast, which should be Friday night, February 26th, we'll do another Grand Solar Minimum news update. Unless we have breaking news, then we will be on the air as well. Until then, take care, everyone, and we will talk soon.
Do you like this show? Give us a thumbs up. Want to support us more? Share to your favorite social media platform. Buy a t-shirt or become a Patreon. All links are in the description below.